Hey guys, welcome back to your cosmic channel with me, cateslade, where we discuss galactic knowledge and wisdom from within. Today, we're going to talk about 5 things you need to know about the GREYS, aka the Zeta Reticuli, one of my favorite subjects. So let's get right to it. What is up? Welcome back. Thank you for joining. Like I said, today we're going to talk about the GREYS and the Zeta Reticuli. So, first things first is you probably have a lot of preconceptions about the GREYS from like the 1950s and Roswell and all of that kind of stuff, but we're just going to stick with like 5 really essential things I think you need to know right now. There's so much more to go into, that these are like really just essentials. So first up, it's really important to know that just the scale of it, like the sheer scale of the GREY timeline. So it's really just kind of about understanding that there's loads of different branches and that those timelines and those species evolve in many, many different ways. So when we say the GREYS and the Zetas, it's super, super generic and very kind of, you know, stereotypical, I guess, in a way. But the idea behind me, you know, talking about this is really just, you know, learning about them and understanding them from a higher perspective and really just getting past all of that kind of xenophobia and fear that I feel in the collective is still very much out there. So it's really just about transmuting that. So when we understand that there are these hundreds of different branches and, you know, where the timeline, you know, kind of branched off and they had different experiences, when we hear certain stories about GREYS, it's important to understand that, you know, that's just like one example and it's not a blanket for the entire GREY species. Yeah, so let's just really kind of let that sink in. You know, just as we would do that with humans, we wouldn't, you know, kind of blanket stereotype humans. So yeah, in the same way, let's not blanket and stereotype the GREYS. Another thing to understand is that those different branches of that, you know, their timeline and evolution would have been extremely different in terms of how those beings evolved and how the species evolved. So I'll give you an example about this. So an example is there was a evolution of a GREY timeline, the Zeta Reticuli species, whereby their solar system had many suns. So they had more than one sun, which means that they evolved not having a lot of sleep. They didn't have any sleep. They didn't really need to sleep because it wasn't really dark. So they evolved not sleeping and not dreaming, okay? So as they evolved technologically, they became very, very technologically advanced, a spacefaring species. But at the same time, you know, parallel to this evolution, as we know the well-known story that the GREYS, you know, cut off their emotions and they were very, very involved in the mental body and the mind activity. So that meant that they didn't have any empathy. So what happened then is these GREYS, you know, as they became very technologically advanced, they would sometimes come back to Earth and they would stand in people's bedrooms and like watch them sleep. And obviously, as we know, there's a wealth of stories and information about that out there about GREYS coming into people's bedrooms, abducting them, you know, doing all these kinds of things with them. Again, we'll get into that, but that is just one aspect of you know, who they are. It's a very important aspect because it created like the hybrid program and the SSRNI and all of that kind of stuff. But basically, what's important to remember with this point is that those different evolutionary worlds that they came from would have created, you know, very different perspectives in different species. One being that, you know, they didn't sleep and didn't dream and they didn't have any empathy, so they didn't think that it would be weird to be so intrusive as to go into people's bedrooms without being invited. So a lot of people got very scared about that, and, you know, understandably. Okay, so the next thing is that these beings with, you know, the no empathy, completely cut off from their emotional bodies, you know, obviously they couldn't reproduce. The story is so dramatic, you know, they couldn't reproduce because they didn't love, and you absolutely cannot procreate as a species if there's no love. It's just a big no-no. So, you know, they cloned and they used technology to fix their problems, and they didn't really ever kind of delve into the fear of their existential crisis, and it just got worse and worse and worse. So what this kind of story is about is the lower density timelines, right? So what we kind of mean by that, and what we're trying to say by that, is that it's just, again, one element, just one perspective of these greys. There are many, 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 many timelines of grey from the evolved timelines when they were a healed species, where they, you know, were actually so loving. And my connection with the Zetas are very, very much kind of from like an evolutionary, like a future time stream when they are a healed species, and they are incredibly loving. And, you know, one of the reasons that they came to Earth, you know, one of the reasons was because they wanted to learn about emotions from humanity. And who best to learn about emotions than from humanity, because we are full of emotions, and emotions is like our thing, which kind of like leads me to the next point, which is this idea and this story that's going around, which I feel like is still kind of a little bit based in, you know, collective fear, which is why I wanted to talk about it, is this AI hive mind insectoid timeline. Well, not the insectoid, but I'll kind of get into that. But this AI hive mind story that has been, you know, developed about what happened with the Zetas is absolutely true. We are that we could potentially be like that. Basically, that did already happen. Humans did go into this timeline where we cut ourselves off from our emotions. They are an evolutionary projection of us in the future if we cut ourselves off from our emotions and only focus on the intellectual technology side, and we create this kind of AI hive mind dystopia, basically. So that did happen, and those Zetas did come back and did do not very nice things potentially. But again, it's really important to understand that this timeline branch is no longer a potential. It's already happened, and the message that came to me really clearly is that God does not waste energy rehashing shit that didn't work. Okay, so it's really nothing for us to worry about. It's super interesting. It's a huge part of our, you know, history, forward and backward history. I don't really think about history in terms of, you know, timeline. It's just so interesting, you know, that happened, and it must have been incredibly traumatic and so epic beyond words, you know, that we can't really understand. But what's important to remember is, yes, that did happen to the Greys, and yes, it was a timeline potential, but that potential is no longer one for us to worry about, because again, like I said, God does not waste energy rehashing shit that didn't work, okay? Very important message, which I got really recently actually, which is why I wanted to say it. So just don't worry about it. Like, yes, this did happen, but it's not going to happen again. And but it's still really important for us to know that that did happen, so that we can, again, just understand more about the Zetas and just really kind of get into, you know, who they are and who they were. And they really are learning from humanity. They love humanity so much. And there was a hybrid program that humans and Zetas were working together with. Which leads me to the next point, the final point, the fifth point, which is this hybrid program is an archetypal relationship. So what that means is that the hybrids from the Zeta and the human program are a beautiful archetypal, literal and archetypal representation of this polarity integration that we are currently going through as humanity awakens into the fourth density, and, you know, ultimately into the fifth density, which is a gamma frequency type of existence. So it's just a really beautiful way of understanding that this relationship between humans and Zetas is a bridge, and we're kind of bridging these realities. And archetypally, it's a way of us understanding that we can create these new realities when we form these relationships, these beautiful relationships. And like I said, you know, it's super archetypal, but it's also literal, and it's about that polarity integration and bridging these worlds and creating new realities, new utopias. The Esasani, for sure, you know, that's an example of the incredibly enlightened, beautiful, spiritual species that has come from the program, the hybrid program. And it's a common ground. It's a common ground for us to have these relationships with ETs, essentially. Cool, so I hope that was helpful, and I really love talking about this. Please, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments, like, subscribe, all of that jazz. Thank you so much. I love you very much, and please join me again for another video, and I'll see you really soon.